Welcome back to Cloud Hero with Alain, the podcast where we break down cloud security into something anyone can understand. I am learning AWS right alongside you with a goal to pass the AWS Certified Security Specialty exam, but more importantly, to actually apply it in the real world. Today's topic, the AWS Shared Responsibility Model. If you've ever wondered who is securing what in the cloud, this is where it all gets cleared up. So let's break it down. First, AWS responsibilities, which is what we call security of the cloud. Think of it this way. AWS is in charge of all the physical stuff you will never touch, and we're referring to data centers, the networking backbone, and even the basics like keeping the power on and the cooling running. They also own and maintain hardware such as servers, storage, and you name it. And here's the big one. They manage the hypervisor, which is the invisible software layer that makes virtualization possible. The bottom line here is AWS keeps the engine running so you can focus on driving forward. Now, your responsibilities, also known as security in the cloud. This is where you step in. It starts with setting up IAM, Identity and Access Management, to make sure that only the right people and systems can get in. You are also in charge of keeping your data encrypted, both when it is sitting in the storage and when it is on the move. Next comes network protection, things like firewalls, security groups, and network access control lists to control who can talk to what. And finally, if you are running EC2 instances, it is on you to patch the operating system and application so that you can shut the door to vulnerabilities before they can sneak in. The bottom line here is AWS builds and secures the foundation, but you are the one who locks the doors and keeps everything inside safe. Now here's the twist. Your responsibility actually changes depending on what type of AWS service you are using. When you are working with infrastructure services like EC2, for example, AWS is basically handing you the raw building blocks, and with that control comes more responsibility, like for example, patching the operating system, setting up your firewalls, and making sure your data is encrypted. If you are using managed services like RDS or S3, AWS steps in and basically assists you with things like patching the database software, but don't get too comfortable because you are still in charge of things like setting up the data permissions, managing encryptions, and making sure your backups are in place. And then there's Lambda, the serverless service. Here AWS is doing even more behind the scenes, but again, you still own your part, securing your code, controlling IAM roles, and making sure the right people and only the right people can trigger your functions. So yeah, depending on what AWS service you are using, the balance can shift. The key here is to know exactly where AWS stops and where you start. As I was reading the material, it finally clicked why this stuff really matters for the certification. AWS wants to see if you can clearly spot where their responsibility ends and where yours begins. Here is a classic example they love to throw at you. They will describe a situation where data from an S3 bucket gets exposed, then ask whose fault is it? If that bucket was public because I said it that way, well, that's mine, right? That's my fault. That's on me. And that's the whole point. Cloud security isn't just about knowing the tools. It is also about understanding what you are actually expected to lock down. That's why I'm studying for this certification, to make sure I get that line right and can protect what's mine. Thank you for listening. This was Cloud Hero with Alain. Remember, AWS secures the cloud and you secure what is in the cloud. The shared responsibility model works only when you know exactly where the line is and own your part of the game. In the next episode, we will dive deep into quote AWS security secrets, the game-changing principles that guide every move you make in the cloud, from managing identities to locking down data. Until then, stay cloud smart and stay tuned.